What would you do if someone handed you 6 bighas of dead, crumbling hillside and the whole village laughed in your face? What if you had no money, no parents, no one standing beside you, just a piece of burnt earth that hadn't grown a single thing in 20 years? What if the very people who were supposed to welcome you looked at you and said, "You don't belong here. You can't do this. Go back to wherever you came from"? Most people would walk away. Most people would sell it, forget it, move on, and never look back. But 2 kids who grew up with nothing, who never had a home, never had a mother's hand to hold, never had a father's voice telling them they could do it, they looked at that dead slope and saw something nobody else could see. They didn't see failure. They didn't see rock and dust and 20 years of neglect. They saw a thirsty soil waiting to be fed. They saw a hillside waiting for someone patient enough to care. This is the story of Rafi and Mili, 2 orphans, one dead hillside, and a valley that eventually went completely, humbly, beautifully silent. Let us know in the comments from which part of the world you are watching this video. If you're enjoying our videos, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. My name is Rafi, and my sister's name is Mili. We are blood, same mother, same father, but we have no mother, no father. When Rafi was 7 years old and Mili was just 5, on a rainy night, a bus accident took everything from us. One moment we had a family. One moment we had a warm home, a mother who cooked dinner, a father who came back from work and ruffled our hair. And then, in one single terrible moment on a wet road in the dark, we became completely alone in this world. I still remember that night with a clarity that never fades. Sitting in a hospital corridor, little Millie sleeping in my lap, her small hand gripping the fabric of my shirt even in sleep. I didn't fully understand what had happened. My mind couldn't hold it. I only knew one thing because someone said it out loud in the hallway. Said it the way adults sometimes say hard things when they think children aren't listening. These 2 have nobody left. Nobody left. I was 7 years old, and those 3 words became the walls of my world. After that night, 11 long years passed inside an orphanage, a small, underfunded orphanage in Mymensingh district. That is where we grew up. That is where we learned what we were made of. It wasn't a cruel place. The people there were tired, not evil. There was food, not always enough, but food. There were other children, dozens of them, each carrying their own invisible weight. There were rules, routines, early mornings, and lights out at 9. It wasn't great, it wasn't terrible, but there was one thing it could not give us, and that was the feeling of being someone's everything. But one thing was taught there, silently through every single day. You must fight for yourself. Nobody is coming to hold your hand. The world is large and indifferent, and the only person who will consistently show up for you is the person you see in the mirror every morning. Rafi took that lesson and focused it into studying. He read every book he could find. He sat near the window for the light when the electricity cut out. He listened in every class like his life depended on it, because he understood, even then, that his mind was the only tool he had that nobody could take away. Mili took that same lesson and turned it toward the earth. In the orphanage's tiny garden, a scraggly little patch of soil near the back wall, she planted whatever she could find. Tomatoes, mint, bitter gourd, marigolds along the edge. She watered them every morning before breakfast. She talked to them, quietly, when no one was watching. The elderly caretaker uncle used to pass by and stop sometimes. He would shake his head slowly and say, "Mili, what magic do you have in your hands? Your plants never die." Mili would just smile. But deep inside, beneath that quiet smile, she was dreaming with a stubborn, specific kind of hope, dreaming of a day when she would have her own piece of land, not borrowed soil, not a corner of someone else's garden, her own, where she would plant trees that would grow tall, where she would look out every morning and see green that she had made with her own hands. How far that dream had to travel before it became real, what it cost, what it asked of them, what it took from them and gave back in ways they never expected, that is the story I'm telling you today. When Rafi turned 18, the day came. He walked out of the orphanage gates. With Mili beside him, she was 16, and she walked out with her chin up. Nothing in his hands. 300 taka in his pocket. A small parting gift from the orphanage fund. Wearing clothes the institution had given him, a little too short in the arms. But inside his chest, one thing remained completely solid. A kind of quiet, unshakable determination that had been building for 11 years. They needed a place. They needed income. Mili needed food, and she needed to keep learning. Rafi needed work, real work, not handouts. For the first few weeks, they stayed with a distant relative in town, a situation that was made clear would not last long. The relative was kind enough but had her own difficulties, her own crowded rooms, her own children to feed. Then, out of nowhere, news arrived. An old friend of their grandfather, a weathered village man named Alauddin Uncle, who had known their family in another lifetime, tracked them down through a chain of people who knew people. He came himself, sat down with a cup of tea and a serious expression, and told them something that stopped the room. There was a piece of land, registered in Rafi and Mili's names, in the hilly region of Netrokona district, left behind by their grandfather, a man they barely remembered, who had died when they were very small. When Rafi heard this, he felt something shift inside his chest, like a door opening in a dark room, like fate was finally, slowly, cautiously looking up from whatever it had been doing and turning its face toward them. He reached across and squeezed Mili's hand. But when Alauddin Uncle told him the full picture, Rafi's heart did not soar. It dropped. There is land, but there is nothing on the land. The uncle set down his tea and explained it carefully, the way you explain something to someone you don't want to hurt but have to be honest with. 6 bighas pressed against the side of a hill. There used to be trees, good trees, old trees. Your grandfather planted many of them himself. But 20 years ago, after he passed, some people from the village helped themselves. They cut everything down, every tree, took the wood, and left. Now it's just a slope. Rocks, dry cracked earth, dead stumps sticking up like broken teeth. Rafi asked, "The whole hillside is empty?" Empty is one word. Dead is another. The sun burns it in the hot season. The rain strips it bare in the monsoon. Nothing grows there. Nothing holds. The village people have a name for it. They call it the burnt slope. The burnt slope. 6 bighas of nothing. At that moment, Mili was sitting quietly beside Rafi. She had been listening to every word with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes steady. Rafi turned to her. "Mili, don't be sad. It's all right. We'll figure something else out. We'll find another way." Mili looked up. That familiar light in her eyes. The same light that had been there over the orphanage garden, over every small struggling plant she had coaxed back to life. She said, "Brother, I want to go to that land." The name of that village in Netrokona was Kalapahar. Even the name tells you what kind of place it was. Kalapahar, Black Mountain, a name given by people who had looked at that landscape for generations and decided it was dark, hard, unyielding. They took a bus, then a smaller bus, then they walked the last stretch carrying their bags, a small bundle each, following Alauddin Uncle along a dirt track that wound upward through scrubby fields and dry brush. The day Rafi and Mili arrived for the first time, the afternoon sun was tilting low and hot, throwing long shadows across the hillside. Climbing up the slope for the first time, they saw it for themselves. The uncle had not exaggerated. If anything, he had been gentle about it. There was truly nothing there. Row after row of old tree stumps, blackened at the edges where someone had burned the undergrowth. Dead roots curling up from the ground like grasping fingers. Gray, powdery soil that shifted and crumbled underfoot. Rocks pushing up through the earth in jagged, uncomfortable shapes. A few scraggly weeds here and there, the kind that survive everywhere because nothing wants them. And above it all, the open sky, beating down without mercy. No shade, no cover. Just heat and dust, and the sound of dry wind moving across empty ground. Rafi stood there and felt the weight of it. 6 bighas. This was their inheritance. Mili stood still for a long moment beside him, not moving, not speaking, just looking at the hillside with that same quiet intensity she used to give to the orphanage garden. Then she did something that surprised Rafi. She knelt down, right there on the slope. She pressed her knees into the gray earth and reached down and picked up a handful of soil. She held it up and looked at it carefully, really looked at it, turning it in her palm, watching how it moved. Then she brought it close and smelled it. Rafi asked, "What are you seeing?" Mili let the soil fall slowly through her fingers. She watched it drift. Then she said, "Brother, this soil isn't dead. It's just thirsty." They came down to the village as the light faded. The village of Kalapahar was small, a few dozen families clustered around a main road, tea stalls, a market that came to life twice a week. People who had lived there all their lives and knew everything about everyone and everything about the land. When they arrived, word traveled fast, the way word always travels in small places. The neighbors came. Not out of warmth exactly. Out of the very particular curiosity that small villages have when something unusual appears. The way people slow down to watch an accident, not quite wanting to stare but unable to look away. Karim Mia, from the house next to where they would be staying, a broad man with a loud voice and an opinion about everything, appeared first. He looked at Rafi. He looked at Mili. He looked up at the hillside behind them, and then he laughed. The full, generous laugh of a man who finds something genuinely funny. "Well, well, well, these two young people have come all the way here to settle on the burnt slope? Ha ha ha!" Saleh Bai from the market came by in the evening. He was more measured, the kind of man who delivers bad news as a public service. "Son, I'll be honest with you. Nothing grows on that land. Nothing has grown there for 20 years. Your grandfather tried, and after him, nothing. You plant a tree there, it will die. You pour water on it, the water will vanish into that dry rock. The soil there has no life in it." The older men at the tea stall were less diplomatic. They spoke freely among themselves, not quite to Rafi's face, but easily within hearing. Two orphans, no parents, no money, no experience. And now they've come to grow a forest on a dead mountain. God bless their hearts. The laughter followed Rafi down the road. It stung. There is no point pretending it didn't. After 11 years of being looked at as someone who needed charity, someone with no family, no backing, no story worth telling, to arrive somewhere new and be laughed at immediately before they had even tried anything, that's things in a specific way that sits with you. But Rafi stayed quiet. He had learned, over 11 years, that there is a time for words and a time for silence, and that the best answer to people who laugh at your beginning is to make them watch your ending. That night, the two of them sat in the small, broken tin shed that Alauddin uncle had offered them. A single lantern, the sound of insects outside. Mili said, "Brother, let them laugh. Let them laugh as long as they want. While they're laughing, we'll be working." The first night was spent in that shed, roof leaking slightly at one corner, the floor packed earth, their bags stacked against the wall. Rafi lay awake for most of it, staring at the darkness, thinking through the shape of their situation the way you do when sleep won't come, turning it over, examining it. No money to speak of, no agricultural experience. Rafi had studied, but not farming. No tools beyond the basic ones Alauddin uncle had set aside, no neighbors who believed in them, no safety net if things went wrong. Only one thing existed that was truly theirs: 6 bighas of dead, crumbling, sun-scorched hillside. And one sister who had looked at that hillside and said it was thirsty, not dead. Rafi decided, in the dark of that first night, that he would trust her. The next morning, before the sun had fully climbed, Mili was already on the slope. First task, understand the soil completely. Back in the orphanage, alongside her gardening, she had read an old dog-eared agriculture book that one of the teachers had left behind. She had read it multiple times, the way you read something when it's the only book you have. It had taught her basic things, but solid things. How to test soil, how to read what soil is telling you. She went through what she remembered. Squeeze a fistful of soil tightly in your palm. If it crumbles and falls apart the moment you open your hand, the soil is sandy, loose, with no structure to hold water or nutrients. If it holds a rough shape, there is at least some moisture and organic matter working inside it. She tried it on every part of the hillside: the top, the middle, the bottom edge, upper left corner, lower right. Every time, the soil crumbled. Immediately, completely, without resistance. In the first month after the initial soil preparation, Mili made her first planting decision: bamboo. Rafi looked at the handful of bamboo cuttings she had sourced from the far edge of a nearby property and said, "Bamboo? Why bamboo first?" Mili explained with the patience of someone who has thought this through completely. Bamboo survives in conditions that would kill most other plants. Tough soil, poor nutrients, harsh dry spells. Bamboo pushes through. Its roots are extraordinary. They go deep and they spread wide, gripping the earth from below, creating a network that holds the soil in place. And once bamboo establishes itself, it begins to change the ground around it. Leaf litter, shade, moisture retention. It starts the process of rebuilding the soil ecosystem. And it grows fast, which means visible results, which means motivation. She planted the bamboo cuttings carefully at strategic points across the slope. The village watched and reacted exactly as expected. Karim Mia walked past, looked at the small plantings, and shook his head with the theatrical sadness of a man who has been proven right before and expects to be proven right again. Bamboo. She's planting bamboo on the burnt slope. I have seen many things in my life. This bamboo will not last a month. Salebai was more clinical. The soil is too compacted. The roots have nowhere to go. Mili heard everything. She kept her head down and her hands moving. 3 months passed. Something remarkable, quietly remarkable, not dramatically remarkable, had started to happen. Some of the bamboo cuttings had taken hold. Not all of them, maybe 60%, but 60% of something where previously there had been nothing. That was real. That was alive. Small green shoots pushing up from the gray earth, thin as a finger, but undeniably alive. Mili would go up the slope every morning and check each one. She knew them individually, which ones were strongest, which ones were struggling, which ones had surprised her by surviving a particularly hot week. She was encouraged in the deep, careful way that cautious people allow themselves to be encouraged. Not celebrating, not declaring victory, but allowing herself to feel that the direction was right. And then the monsoon arrived. This particular monsoon did not ease in gently. It came all at once. A week of rain that didn't stop, heavy and relentless. The kind of rain that turns paths into streams and streams into small rivers. The hillside, where they had loosened the soil, where they had worked the earth to break up the compaction, could not hold against that volume of water. The water sheeted down the slope in great curtains. It found every loose patch of earth and took it. The small channels Mili had dug, they helped somewhat, but they were not enough. Not yet. Not without the structural support they still needed. When the rain finally paused for a day, Rafi went up to assess. 3 months of work. Large sections of the slope had lost their thin topsoil. The careful cow manure mixing washed out in places. Several of the bamboo plantings, the ones that hadn't yet driven their roots deep enough, were gone. Tilted sideways, drowned in mud, carried partway down the slope. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to feel like a blow to the stomach. Mili was already there when Rafi arrived. She had gotten there first. She was standing on the muddy slope, her feet sinking slightly with each step, looking at what the rain had done, with the quiet, still expression of someone absorbing something very difficult. Rafi walked up beside her. He didn't say anything immediately. He just stood there with her, looking at the damage, letting her have the moment she needed. Finally, he said her name. Mili. She turned. Her eyes were bright with water, but she wasn't crying. There was grief in her face, but also something else, something harder and clearer underneath it. She said, "Brother, I made a mistake, a fundamental one. On a hillside, before you plant, you have to control the water first. You have to build something that stops the soil from running. I didn't do that properly. I thought the planting itself would be enough to hold things. I was wrong." Rafi said, "You weren't wrong. You were learning. There's a difference." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. The village, of course, found out. In small villages, rainfall and its consequences are public news. Karim Mia did not gloat, not quite, but the way he spoke about it in the market carried the unmistakable flavor of someone who has been waiting patiently to say, "I told you so," and is now allowing himself the quiet pleasure of it. The burnt slope washed out in the rains. As expected, these things happen. The young people tried their best, but that land is what it is. Salebai was more direct. They should sell it now while they can still get something for it. There's no shame in recognizing when something isn't working. Rafi heard these things. He felt the anger move through him, clean and hot and clarifying. And when it passed, what remained was not despair or doubt. What remained was a decision, made quietly and completely, the way the most important decisions are always made. He was not leaving. He did not care what it took. He did not care how long it took. He was going to stay on this land and make it work, or he was going to exhaust every possible option trying. Either outcome, he would not be the one who walked away. That night, the two of them sat by the lantern. Mili was different, not broken, but reorganized, as if the setback had shaken her, and the shaking had settled something into a clearer arrangement. She said, "Brother, I need to learn more, not just from the old book, from someone who actually knows this kind of land, this kind of problem." Rafi said, "Where do we find that person?" Mili said, "The agriculture office. There has to be someone there who knows about hillside farming. We go and we ask, directly, honestly, everything." The next morning, they made the journey to the Upazela agriculture office. It was not a glamorous building, functional, dusty fans, stacks of paper, a waiting bench along one wall. The officer behind the desk looked up from his work when they came in. He took them in. Two young people, the young man's hands showing the calluses of physical labor, the young woman with the particular focused look of someone who has been thinking hard about a problem for a long time. "What can I do for you?" Rafi spoke clearly. "Sir, we have 6 bighas of land on a hillside outside Kalapahar village. The soil is degraded, compacted, low organic matter, very poor water retention. We've been working on it for 3 months. We had some plantings, but the monsoon washed most of it out. We need to understand what we're doing wrong and how to do it right. We don't have money to waste. Every taka we spend needs to work." The officer, his name was Mr. Abdus Salam, and he had spent his career working on exactly these kinds of degraded hillside situations, looked at them for a moment. Then he said, "Close the door and sit down. This is going to take some time." That conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. Mr. Salam asked questions first. He wanted to understand the slope, the angle, the direction it faced, what the drainage pattern was, what the soil texture was at different depths. He listened to Mili's description with genuine attention, occasionally asking her to clarify, nodding when she said something that told him she had been observing carefully. Then he began to explain, methodically, precisely, the way a good teacher explains things to students he has decided are serious. Hillside farming is a completely different discipline from flatland farming. The number one enemy is erosion, water taking your soil away before anything can establish itself. Everything you do has to address that first. If you don't solve the water problem, nothing else works. It doesn't matter how good your seeds are or how hard you work. The first technique is contour bunding. You build narrow earthen barriers running horizontally across a slope, not up and down with the hill, but across it, following the contour lines. These barriers interrupt the flow of water. Instead of sheeting straight down and picking up speed and soil as it goes, the water hits a barrier, slows down, spreads sideways, and has time to sink into the ground. This is not complicated technology. It is careful physical labor, but it works. The second technique is mulching. You cover every bare patch of soil with organic material, dead leaves, rice straw, coconut fiber, dried grass, anything available. This covering does several things simultaneously. It reduces the impact of raindrops hitting bare soil directly, which is actually one of the main causes of surface erosion. It keeps moisture in the soil by reducing evaporation, and as it breaks down, it adds organic matter back into the earth. The third thing, and this is critical, is your choice of pioneer species. The plants you use in the first phase must be ones specifically suited to hard, degraded conditions. They must be able to survive while the soil is still poor, and they must actively work to improve it. Bamboo was a reasonable instinct, but before bamboo, I would recommend ipil ipil. Do you know it?
Mili shook her head. It's a leguminous tree, a nitrogen fixer. Its roots form a partnership with soil bacteria that pull nitrogen from the air and deposit it into the soil. This is like giving your earth a slow, continuous fertilizer treatment for free. It grows fast, it tolerates poor conditions, it produces dense shade that helps other plants establish below it, and its leaves make excellent mulch. It is the right first tree for what you are dealing with. Mili had been writing everything in a small notebook she'd brought. Pages of careful notes, diagrams of the bunding layout, lists of species names. She looked up and asked, "Sir, where do we get ipil saplings?" Mr. Salam looked at her notebook, at her careful handwriting. He said, "I have them in my department nursery. I'll give you what you need, at no cost. We have programs for exactly this kind of land rehabilitation work. But you will need to do the physical construction yourselves, the bunding especially. That is weeks of serious labor." Rafi said, "Sir, labor is the one resource we are not short of." Mr. Salam nodded once. "Then I think you will do this." They went back to the burnt slope with a plan. A real plan, grounded in knowledge rather than hope alone. And this time, they built the foundation before they built anything else. Contour bunding came first. Rafi and Mili spent 10 full days on nothing but this, surveying the slope, walking it methodically, marking the horizontal lines with sticks and string, then digging, throwing up narrow walls of compacted earth across the hillside, one after another, running sideways across the slope like a series of wide, shallow steps. It was exhausting, repetitive, unglamorous work. There was nothing to show for it at the end of a day that looked like progress, just more lines of raw earth across a still bare hillside. But Mili understood it differently now. She said, "Brother, these bunds are the foundation. Everything we plant after this is protected by what we're doing right now. We're not wasting time. We're buying time for the trees." Rafi worked every morning at his labor jobs and came back every afternoon. Mili worked from the first light until she couldn't see clearly enough to judge where to dig. Then came the mulching. They collected everything available. Dead leaves from the edge of the nearby forest, they would bring sacks of them back up the slope. Rice straw from a farmer who was glad to have someone take it off his hands. Dried grass from the roadside. Coconut husks from the market. They spread it across every bare patch of the hillside, packing it gently around the bases of the earthen bunds, creating a continuous organic blanket over the damaged soil. This was the part that felt most like care, like tucking something in. Mili worked quietly during these hours, and Rafi noticed she seemed to be in a different state, slower, more deliberate, as if she were in conversation with the ground. He didn't interrupt it. Then came the trees. Mr. Salam delivered the ipil saplings, 100 of them, small and unpromising looking in their small plastic bags, barely knee-height. Mili planted each one with specific intention. She had designed the planting pattern based on what Mr. Salam had taught her and what she had worked out herself, placing them above the earthen bunds where they would catch the intercepted water, spacing them to eventually create overlapping canopy coverage across the slope. She spent 3 days planting all 100. Then Shimul, the red silk cotton tree, planted in the more exposed upper sections where its tolerance for harsh conditions was needed. Then bamboo again, this time planted in protected positions below the first tier of bunds, where the soil was already slightly better from the mulching and where the earthen barriers would shelter the roots from the force of rain. Every planting decision was deliberate. Every species had a reason for being in its specific position on the slope. This was not random hoping anymore. This was a system. 2 months after the planting, on a morning in early spring, Mili went up the slope before breakfast as she always did, and stopped. The first ipilipil leaves had opened, tiny, bright, an almost impossibly tender green against the gray and brown of the hillside. The kind of green that only exists in the very first unfurling of new leaves, before the world has had time to weather them. She stood there for a long moment and looked at them. Then she sat down on the slope, right there in the dust and the rocks, and wept. Not from sadness, from something that has no clean name. The emotion that arrives when something you poured enormous effort and hope and fear into, finally, quietly, simply begins to work. Rafi arrived 20 minutes later and found her sitting there with tears drying on her face and her eyes still on the small green leaves. He sat down beside her. He didn't cry. He was not built for it, had long ago become someone who held things internally. But he put his arm around his sister's shoulders and they sat there together on the hillside that was just barely beginning to become something, and neither of them needed to say anything.
The village noticed. News of the sprouting traveled, as all news travels in small places. But the village's response was the response of people who have been skeptical for so long that they have committed to it. Karimia, a few leaves. Anyone's plants sprout leaves. The question is whether they survive. Salebay, it's still early. The dry season will test it. That soil has nothing to feed those roots with. Rafi heard. He had developed, by this point, a very specific relationship with the village's doubt. He no longer felt stung by it. He had internalized it as fuel, a steady, reliable source of motivation that replenished itself automatically every time someone expressed certainty that he would fail. He just smiled. Around this time, roughly 5 months after they had arrived at Kalapahar, a quiet crisis developed. The seasonal agricultural work that had been providing Rafi's daily labor income dried up. The main harvest season ended. The farmers who had needed extra hands no longer needed them. The income stopped. The savings were minimal. They had been spending carefully, but there had been almost nothing to save from day labor wages after food and basic supplies. One evening, Mili set down her dinner, a small amount of rice and dal, and sat quietly, without drama. "Brother, we don't have money for rice after today." Rafi sat with this for a moment. Then he got up. He walked to Alauddin uncle's house in the dark. He knocked. The uncle came to the door. Rafi said, "Uncle, I need to borrow money. Not much, enough for a week. I will pay back every taka." The uncle looked at him, at the look on his face, at the exhaustion and the determination that had somehow become the same expression. He went inside and came back with the money. He handed it over without a single comment. No lecture, no conditions. Just the money. Rafi thanked him, walked home. They ate. But in the space between leaving the uncle's house and arriving home, Rafi made a decision that was not dramatic, but was absolute. He would never be in that position again. He would not rely on borrowed money or anyone's generosity. He would find another way, regardless of how it felt or what it cost him. The next day, he went to the Upasela town. He found a small hotel, the kind that serves workers and travelers on a budget. Simple food, long hours. He spoke to the owner. He got a second job, washing dishes in the evenings after his daytime labor ended, 6 days a week. Day labor starting at first light, evening shift at the hotel until late, then back to the shed, and in the morning, before anything else, up the slope with Mili for an hour before the day labor started. His body registered its objection clearly. Muscle fatigue that didn't go away with sleep, hands that were always either dry or wet, cracked in 2 different ways. But every afternoon, the 20 minutes he had on the slope before going to town, he would see the ipilipil, taller by another increment, denser, the leaves darker and more established, the first signs of the overlapping canopy beginning to form. And something in that sight, something about seeing the work accumulate visibly, seeing the direction of change, made the exhaustion something he could carry. 2 years from the day they had first stood on the burnt slope and felt the gray soil crumble through their fingers, the slope was no longer gray. The ipilipil trees had grown,
most of them past head height, some of them substantially taller, their canopy beginning to knit together in the way a forest begins to form from individual trees. Underneath them, the shade had changed the soil, darker, slightly softer, the beginning of a leaf litter layer that was starting to create its own small ecosystem. The bamboo grove that Mili had established below the first tier of bunds was solid now, dense and rustling in any breeze, its roots so thoroughly engaged with the hillside soil that the ground in that section had become noticeably more stable. The shimul trees on the upper slope, the red silk cotton, had put out flowers for the first time, brilliant red, visible from the road below. People walking the road would stop, look up, sometimes stand for a moment, genuinely uncertain, as if recalibrating what they knew about that hillside. Wait, is that the burnt slope? That can't be the burnt slope. It is. I pass here every day. Mili had kept moving while the trees grew. She was not someone who could be satisfied with only tending what was already planted. Her mind was always looking at the next phase, what the slope was becoming, what it could support, what the next layer of the system should be. Underneath the growing forest canopy, she had identified the conditions for a second crop layer: shade, moisture retention, significantly improved, a degree of protection from direct sun and harsh wind. These were the conditions that medicinal plants thrive in. She planted holy basil in the areas of dappled light below the ipilipil, ginger in the sheltered lower sections, turmeric, lemongrass along the upper edges where it caught the morning sun. These were not exotic or expensive choices, they were practical. Plants that local people use, that healers and households seek, that have consistent demand at every rural market. Mili began harvesting the first small yields and taking them to the weekly market. The first week, 150 taka. She came home and found Rafi sitting outside the shed after his long day, and she put the folded notes in his hand. He opened his hand and looked at them. He said, "This is the beginning." She said, "The beginning of a different beginning." The village's posture was shifting. Not dramatically, this was not a movie moment. Nobody came forward and made a speech. But the way people spoke about the burnt slope had changed. The laughter was gone, replaced by something more complicated. A reluctant curiosity, a careful reevaluation happening quietly behind the usual expressions. Karim Mia came to the edge of the hillside one afternoon. He stood there and looked up at the trees. Actually looked, for a longer time than he needed to if he was just passing through. Then he said, half to Rafi and half to himself, "Well, the trees aren't bad." Rafi said, "No, uncle, they're coming along." Karim Mia made a sound that could have been agreement and walked on. Rafi watched him go, and smiled, just slightly. The smile of someone who has waited patiently for something and is content to let the moment be small. In the third year, Mili made the move she had been planning for months. She had spoken to Mr. Salam. She had done research at the office, reading whatever reports and agricultural guides they had available. She had found the nursery on the other side of the district that specialized in fruit-bearing trees suited to hillside conditions. Banana, papaya, Indian gooseberry, olive variety adapted to the region. These trees represented a transition from soil rehabilitation work to a genuinely productive orchard system, from survival to something that could generate real, consistent, growing income. Rafi asked a practical question: the money. Mili had the answer ready. There's a government agricultural credit scheme, small loans for first-generation farmers working on land rehabilitation. Mr. Salam has already told me we qualify. He'll write the supporting recommendation. Rafi said, "A bank? They'll actually lend to us?" Mili said, "We have 6 bighas of registered land. That's collateral. We have 2 years of documented work on that land. That's a track record. And we have Mr. Salam's recommendation. That's credibility. We have a case. We make it." The loan application process was extended and bureaucratic in the way that government processes always are. Forms that required other forms, offices that sent them to other offices, signatures that required other signatures. It took 8 weeks. But at the end of 8 weeks, 25,000 taka. The saplings arrived, banana, papaya, gooseberry, carried up the slope carefully,
planted in the positions Mili had planned for them across the middle sections of the hillside, where the soil was now substantially improved from 3 years of the epil-epil's nitrogen fixing and the continuous leaf litter accumulation. Neat rows, carefully spaced, each planting hole prepared with composted organic matter. The monsoon that year arrived and departed and left behind something that nobody on the hillside or in the village below had expected. The rain had been heavy, comparable to the monsoon that had washed Mili's first plantings away 3 years earlier, but the burnt slope held completely. Not a significant loss, not a washed-out section. The root network of the epil-epil and bamboo, 3 years deep and wide, gripped the earth from below while the earthen bunds interrupted the water from above. The mulch absorbed the first impact of rainfall before it could strip the surface. And after the monsoon passed, the small stream that ran along the base of the hillside, that had always run thin in dry seasons and flooded briefly in wet seasons and then receded, was flowing differently. More steadily, more continuously. The old farmer Harish Ali noticed first. He came to Rafi on a morning in the dry period after the monsoon, when streams in this region normally began to thin. He said, "Rafi, something is different with the water this year. My end of the stream, I'm getting flow I don't normally get in this season. Has something changed up on your hillside?" Rafi said, "Come, let me show you something." He brought Harish Ali up the slope. He walked him through it, the root systems below ground, the way they were holding groundwater in the soil like a slow reservoir. The water that fell as rain was being captured and held by the tree roots, rather than sheeting off immediately. And that captured water was seeping out slowly, steadily, continuously, into the stream below and deeper into the groundwater table beneath. Harish Ali stood on the hillside and looked down at the village below. He said, "So your trees are feeding our wells." Mili said, "Yes, uncle. Trees do not just shade, they make water." The fourth year, the burnt slope, the slope that had been called dead for 20 years, that had been pointed at as evidence that some land simply cannot be brought back, was unrecognizable. From the road below, in the early morning when mist sat in the valley, it looked like a natural forest had always been there. Dense, multi-layered, dark green at the top where the mature ipil-ipil canopy had closed in, lighter green in the middle where the banana and papaya were producing, the feathery texture of bamboo along one flank, and the red of shimul flowers visible from the village road when they opened. The fruit was coming, banana hands hanging heavy and yellow. Papaya, more than they could sell from a single market, so Mili had arranged supply agreements with 2 shops in the Upasilla town. Gooseberry in clusters, picked and dried and sold to herbal medicine suppliers. The medicinal herb operation had grown from that first 150 taco week into something structured. Regular buyers, regular harvest schedules, a small notebook of contacts that Mili maintained with the same care she gave to everything. The income, for the first time, was enough, more than enough. They had repaid the agricultural loan ahead of schedule. They were saving. But none of that, not the fruit, not the income, not the recognition that was beginning to come from the agricultural department, none of it was the biggest change. The biggest change was the water. That dry season, when the rains had been below average for the 2nd year running, and tube wells across the surrounding area were failing one by one, Kalapahar village's water did not run out. The groundwater table, steadily recharged for 4 years by the tree root systems on the hillside above, held. Other villages, within sight of Kalapahar, with similar soil and similar rainfall, were struggling. People were walking further for water. Crops were failing. There was real hardship. Kalapahar had water, and slowly, over the course of that dry season, people understood why. Karim Mia came to the house one evening. He did not come with his usual expansive manner, the loud voice, the ready opinions. He came quietly. He sat down when Rafi offered him a seat. He was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "Rafi, I want to ask you something directly. Is it true, because of what you and your sister did on that hillside, that this village has water when others don't?" Rafi said, "Mr. Salam confirmed it. What we observed, he explained. Reforestation increases the soil's water retention capacity. It recharges the groundwater system. Our hillside has been doing that for 4 years. Karim Mia was quiet again. Then he said, and he said it plainly, without decoration, "I was wrong about you, both of you." I laughed. I was completely, entirely wrong. Rafi looked at this man, who had laughed on that first evening, who had provided a steady stream of skeptical commentary for 4 years, who had been so certain, and felt nothing except a quiet, clean absence of bitterness. He said, "Uncle, forget it. What do you need?" Karim Mia said, "My slope on the other side of my property. It's in worse condition than yours was. I want to try what you did. Will Mili teach me? Will you help me?" They came one by one after that. "Saleh Bai, Rafi, I want to carry your medicinal herbs in my shop permanently. I'll sell them at a fair price. Let's make an arrangement." "Harej Ali, my granddaughter, she follows you around whenever she gets the chance. She wants to learn everything you know. Would you take her on?" Others, farmers with their own difficult land, asking for advice, asking to be shown, asking if they could do what had been done on the burnt slope. The village that had laughed was now at the door. One evening, Mili said to Rafi, "Brother, they keep coming. What do we do with them?" Rafi said, "We teach them everything."
Everything? No conditions? No conditions. We were alone when we started. We figured it out. They can too. We show them how. Mili said, "You're not angry at them after everything they said?" Rafi considered this for a real moment, thought about whether anger was the honest answer, then said, "I don't have room for it. We were too busy working to build anger, and now I don't know where I'd put it. They understand now. That's what matters." That year, 5 families started working their own neglected hillside land using the methods Mili had developed and refined. She taught every one of them personally. Contour bunding, she walked the slopes with them and marked the lines herself. Mulching, she showed them what materials to use and how to apply them. Pioneer species selection, she explained the logic of each choice, not just the what, but the why, because she understood that people who understand why do the work better than people who are only following instructions. Then, in the second season, banana, papaya, the beginnings of income. Let us know in the comments from which part of the world you are watching this video. If you're enjoying our videos, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The news reached the District Agriculture Extension Department the way news of genuine results always eventually travels, through the grapevine of officials and reports and someone mentioning it to someone else. A team came. 6 people, officers, a soil specialist, someone with a camera. Rafi and Mili walked them across every inch of the hillside, every earthen bund, its construction, its maintenance, why it was placed where it was, every planting decision, the species chosen, the timing, the spacing, the data Mili had been quietly recording in her notebooks from the beginning, rainfall, soil condition notes at different points on the slope, yield records, water flow observations from the stream. The team leader stood at the top of the slope and looked out over what had been done. He said, "This is not what I expected to find. This is a fully developed rehabilitation system. This is documented. This is replicable." He turned to Mili. "Would you be willing to teach this? To go to other sites, other degraded hillsides in this district, and help other farmers implement what you've developed here?" Mili said, "Yes, that's exactly what I want to do." The officer said, "There will be a formal program, government backing, a stipend for your time. We'll start planning it." That evening, after the government team had gone, after the notes had been taken and the photographs and the handshakes, Rafi and Mili climbed to the very top of their hillside, the highest point, the place where 4 years ago there had been nothing but a crumbling stump and wind and the feeling of having inherited something impossible. Now, from here, in the soft gold of late afternoon, the valley was fully visible below. The village with its tin roofs and its cooking fire starting, the road winding through, the stream glinting where it caught the last light, and all around them, below them, breathing in the evening air, the green they had made. Mili sat down on a flat stone.
She was quiet for a while, in the way she was always quiet after something large had happened, letting it settle, finding its place inside her. Then she said, "Brother, do you remember the orphanage garden? That little strip of soil behind the back wall?" "Yes. I used to go there every evening after dinner, just to check on the plants, and I used to think, one day I'll have my own land. It doesn't have to be much, just mine, just somewhere I can plant things and watch them grow." She was quiet again. "I didn't imagine it would be this. I didn't imagine it would become something that the whole village depends on, something that other people will learn from. I just wanted to grow things." Rafi and Mili have a small nursery operation producing saplings for other rehabilitation projects. 12 families in Kalapahar are running their own versions of the system Mili developed. The government program has taken their methods to 4 other sites across the district. The stream runs steadily, even in dry years. The people who laughed, they are quiet now. But understand this, that silence is not the silence of indifference or of people who have simply moved on. That silence is specific. It is the silence of people who said something was impossible and then watched it become real in front of them, and who are still, privately, quietly, working out how to hold that. It is the silence of recognition. It is the silence that says, without words, because no one will say it in words, we were wrong. Rafi and Mili were orphans. No parents, no inheritance worth speaking of, no mentor, no capital, no network, no safety net, no one who had done this before them that they could call for advice. They had a piece of dead land that a whole village had already written off, and one belief: the soil is not dead, it is thirsty. That belief and the years of work it demanded changed a hillside. The hillside changed the water. The water changed the village. And the village, slowly, reluctantly, and then completely, went silent. Maybe you have a burnt slope in your life. Something that the people around you have already decided is finished. Already written the conclusion. Already laughed and walked away from. Maybe it's a dream they said was too small, or too large, or too late, or too much for someone like you. Maybe you've already had your first monsoon, the moment when the rain came and took what you'd built and left you standing on a muddy slope, wondering if they were right after all. They are not right. Soil doesn't die. It gets thirsty, it gets depleted, it gets compacted and stripped and baked and overlooked for 20 years. But underneath all of that, deeper than the doubt, deeper than the damage, something is still working. If you are still working too, keep going. Build your buns, cover your ground, plant the right first tree, even if it's small and unpromising and nothing like what you ultimately want. Trust the direction. Because one day, not on your schedule, but on the land schedule, on life's schedule, the green will come and the valley will go quiet, and that silence will be yours. Thank you for watching today. If this story moved something in you, a like means more than you know. Share this with someone who is standing alone on their own burnt slope right now. They need to hear this. We'll be back with the next story.